I've said for a while we're going to win the election. We have to win the election, because if we don't win the election, I'm not sure we can rescue the country now, but if we have another period of the Uniparty beyond 29, then I think the country will self-immolate. It's on a catastrophic course. We have moved, as you say, the Overton window because we got into Parliament. That's the key move of reform, I think. Until we got into Parliament, nobody saw us in the chamber. Nobody saw that we were talking common sense. All we are is the Common Sense Party. We just want the return of common sense.
We're on. Yeah, so we're back-to-back promotions. We would start in the 10th tier. We're now in the 8th, top of that league. We get ex-academy boys from Luton, some ex-Luton who didn't make it.
There are a lot of ex-academy boys. I don't know if you know, but Glenn Hoddle tried basically taking the ex-academy boys because they've been very well trained.
Yeah.
And we nearly let Gareth Bale go when he was 14. He had a growth spurt. And because he was a left-sided player, and they're as rare as hen's teeth, we didn't let him go, and then he developed, and the rest is history, as they say. I mean, I think we sold him for 10 million, and Tottenham sold him for 100 million euros to Real Madrid. So,
did you get a percentage of that?
Well, Saints, when you go across a football boundary, Saints got 5% of that, so they got another 5 million euros for the training and development. And if he ever had come back to England, it would have been another payment. So the way the training and development works is if it crosses a football boundary, and funny enough, England to Scotland is crossing a football boundary. So that is payment under football terms. I mean, personally, I've always thought there's an argument that Celtic and Rangers should be all part of a British league. That would to me would add flavour to the Premier League,
or maybe the Championship.
Or whichever, but
which would be a disaster.
They're
for
big
them.
clubs, and I think they would bring a further flavour, a bit like sort of Saints playing Pompey or Man City playing Man U or whatever. So look, I mean, it's not going to happen. So yeah, in theory, every time you cross a boundary, if you've done the training and development, you get 5%.
Well, so I don't know how much non-league football you watch, but a lot of it is old school football. Kick it or kick people.
Well, I did own a club called Garforth Town, which is up near Leeds, which because I have a football franchise business with my son, which is called Soccer Tots and Brazilian Soccer Schools. If you've got a football club, you should look at it.
I've heard of Soccer Tots.
With Soccer Tots, we start at 6 months up to 6, and then you've got Brazilian Soccer Schools. Because when I was at Southampton, Clive Woodward and I did a study on why Brazil had won the World Cup more than anybody else, and we came up with this football they used to play called Football de Salao, spelled F-U-T-E-B-O-L, de Salao, S-A-L-A-O, which has been bastardized into futsal.
Yes.
So it's not the same. And futsal, though, is easier to televise, which is why it's all gone to futsal. And funnily enough, since Brazil has moved to futsal away from Football de Salao, she's won the World Cup much less. So what it is you play in a small court, heavy ball, high-tempo music, passing and movement, and you learn. If you watch the Brazilians in the old days, they were capable of getting out of very tight spaces, quick 1-2 passes, always moving. And if you watched Barcelona at their best, when they played Manchester United, there was that game, I think they won it 5-1 or something, maybe 5-0. They should have won by about 14-0. I mean, they were literally passing, moving. They didn't take a corner. They literally passed from a corner. And it's just, that's how football should be played, in my view. And so Football de Salao and that's the basis of it. The Soccer Tots was the start. So you can actually teach people, and it's not just about football, it's about human development. So you teach people social skills, you teach them to learn, you teach them to learn about colours, you teach them about everything, and it's very good parental interface with their children. So particularly fathers who often don't see their children, if they spend half an hour or an hour with their child engaging in something they both love, it works very well. So that gets both boys and girls play soccer, do the Soccer Tots. When they get to 6, often a lot of the girls will leave, but not now, because you've obviously got women's football, which has developed. So look, I mean, I think it's a great, if I was at Southampton now, I would put on our community side, which was a cost centre, where we used to have a sort of network computers for the community and everything else, used to cost us money. It was very important that we were in the community. But now you could put a proper franchise, a Soccer Tots franchise, and you actually could deal with your community side in a properly structured way. And whilst you wouldn't get very many players through into your academy necessarily, you're still doing a lot for your support base. Because the key is for the club, it's a community asset. It has to interface with all these people early on in their lives, and then they become true supporters, not like David Mellor, who sort of migrated from Fulham to Chelsea.
Unacceptable.
People like that, that to me is that is yellow-bellied, unacceptable behaviour.
Well, our manager's an ex-professional, Rob Sinclair. He played for Stevenage and Forest Green, and he came in at step 6 and said, we're going to play football. And so he has targeted...
Well, Forest Green reminds me of the wretched Dale Vince. So
I know.
That's a bad experience.
That aside, he wanted to play football, so he was targeting academy players because they'd been coached. So when you see us, most teams we line up against, we look quite small, but our records, I think we've had an 80% win rate in over 3 seasons. Yeah, it's worked for him. But also on our women's side won the treble last year, and we are second in the table now. We drew with Norwich yesterday.
Well done.
So we get in, on Sunday. So we get in there. But it's funny because it's 3 years now as a chairman, and probably not the same pressures as a Premier League chairman. But one of the things I was thinking on the way down is that I actually think running a football club there's probably some similarities with trying to run a country, in that it's a results-based business that there's never enough money for, which you will know, having run a football club.
Do you think our parliament operates on a results-based basis? I'm not sure. I think they'd have all been fired by now if they did.
Well, they're I think they're operating like some of the clubs that have gone historically bust, like Leeds did, like Derby did.
Yeah, but again,
like
you
Luton
see, we've
did.
got the football regulator. The government, who are basically, or parliament is manned by people who've got no real life experience. Most of them have carried a bag for somebody and probably sucked up to people and got themselves a nice seat, and they're now in Parliament and they're earning 92 grand a year and they don't want to rock the boat. So, but ultimately, football regulation will be a disaster. Football has been successful because it's been unregulated. It's basically been self-regulated. And, the founding formula of the Premier League is what built the Premier League into what it is today. But the Premier League's very responsible. It actually gives lots of money to the PFA, as you probably know.
Yep.
It gives loads of money in relegation payments, and it also spreads some money through the lower leagues. And you talk about Leeds. So what destroyed Leeds was Peter Ridsdale was a fan.
Yeah.
And although I loved football, I was a reasonably competitive hockey player, and I sort of understood. I was a striker. I used to like scoring goals. As Strachan said, occasionally strikers have to stand still. A good striker stands still, doesn't run around like a headless chicken. But I think with the problem with Parliament now, you've got a load of fans who are MPs who don't know which way is up, who are now going to try and regulate English football. A bit like we had, a lot of people under Blair and Brown who came in and decided they were going to regulate our stock market, which at the time was one of the most successful stock markets and spheres for fundraising, where you matched basically people with money with people with ideas, and it worked extremely well. So we have a wonderful timeline, so we're right in the middle of the timelines across the world. So we were booming. We then had the FSA, which morphed into the FCA and the PRA, and they have destroyed London as a capital centre. I've been writing articles about it. It's quite sad to watch it, really. And I think, the city built up its reputation and its success on a self-regulated entity. And then the lads come in because they think they want to tell everybody how to run their businesses, and they want to regulate the market. And it makes me laugh when Rachel Reeves starts talking about regulating for growth. If ever there was an oxymoron, it's there.
Well, I had my mate here last week, someone you probably know well, Steve Parish, the Palace chairman.
Yes.
He was talking about the Premier League as one of our greatest exports. It's one of the big success
stories of the country. The Premier League is the most successful league in the world. It took over, as you probably know, from Serie A in Italy, which was, again, very successful in its time. It gives us huge soft power across the world. It generates huge amounts of tax, because when you read of all these ridiculous salaries that these guys now earn for doing what they love, by the way, it's not like they have to trog in on the tube every day and, work extremely long hours. The training's fun. they get adulation, they get all sorts of sort of benefits of being a Premier League football player. And when they are paid 15, 20, 25, 30 million, it all goes through the payroll. And guess who takes a very large percentage of it? Rachel, exactly. So destroy the golden goose, or destroy the goose, and the golden eggs will disappear.
It reminds me of this question I've defaulted to when I'm discussing politics with my friends now, because of making this show. That some of them come to me and say, I listened to the episode, and my starting question every time with everyone is, name me one thing that government has made better. It stumps everybody.
Nothing.
You
name me one thing Boris did with an 80-seat majority. It's the same. Nothing. In fact, less than nothing. He presided over the greatest influx of legal migrants in our history. So it's disgraceful, having said he'd cut immigration. But look, I mean, the state, all you have to do is look at communism, central planning, statism. What it does is it oppresses people. It turns people into liars, because in order to survive in a statist environment, you have to learn to be a very good liar. And when communism finally fell after whatever it was, a generation and a half, people were shocked. There was just nothing there except people who lied to each other, because in order to survive, they'd had to lie. I don't want that. I want a society where we have vibrant challenge. We have people basically being free to do what they want, to be able to say what they want. I mean, free speech is the key to our society, and it's embedded into our Bill of Rights in 1689. And if they try and take that away from us, then we need to revolt. We can't put up with that. No, but I think we're fighting back. Reform is fighting back, and we're giving people a platform to be able to democratically overturn this nonsense. That's what we've got to do.
I've just finished a 5-year lawsuit for 14 tweets I put out calling a career criminal a fraud. I spent 5 years with the legal system weaponized against me, nearly bankrupted me. There was a clear slap case, but we don't have slap protection yet. It turned out he was a career criminal and a fraud, and eventually, I still don't have my money back because the courts have lost my money. So I don't believe we do have free speech right now, because there are tweets I think of putting out. I think that's a bit risky. I might get in trouble.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to hear that you like that. I mean, in a way, I had the same thing with Dave Jones, who was one of my football managers. You probably know.
Yeah.
Who, when Graham Souness left, Graham and I didn't see eye to eye. I think he famously said, what was somebody with a name like Rupert doing in football? Well, I was there and I was his boss, so he had to put up with it. But he didn't stay very long after we stayed up. So I interviewed all these famous managers, and I appointed Dave Jones, who'd beaten us in the cup. Was managing Stockport at the time. Great guy. Always a bit dangerous to hire a Scouser, but he was a blue Scouser, not a red Scouser. And I got on very well with him. But after 3 years, because he'd worked in a care home, he got accused of all sorts of horrible things, which clearly weren't true. He was a very good family man, great chap. And he basically was charged by the CPS, and this is to your point about courts and lawyers, because lawyers, every now and again throughout history, they get half a cut above themselves. And what you need is somebody to cut them off at the knees and get them back down below the radar. But at the moment, the law's got too big. But with Dave, I actually had to suspend him. He took me to an employment tribunal, which we won because we treated him very well. But once the CPS hit him with all these charges, the Crown Prosecution Service, we had no choice, because we had academies, young people. Mothers were getting upset about what he was accused of and everything else. We put him, he used Kingsley Napley, so he used a private law firm. The people who used, legal aid a lot of them ended up in prison. But no, he fought his case, and the case actually collapsed in 3 days. The costs of the lawyers was about £500,000, and the costs were then taxed. So he was found innocent. Because he'd used a private lawyer, they reduced the costs by half, because it was a private lawyer. So Dave, even as an innocent man, had to pay $250,000 of costs. And the girl at the CPS who brought the case against him, nothing happened. I mean, she was no censure. So look, I think the organs of the state, I'm afraid, are now unfit for purpose, and it doesn't matter which part of the state you look at. And I see it a lot in all the businesses I run and everything else.
See the same?
They are totally dysfunctional. They're wasting our money. and the most extraordinary thing is what they're doing is they're taxing in greater and greater amounts the productive parts of our economy, and they're then distributing it to the unproductive, undeserving parts of our economy. I mean, have you ever thought of or heard of anything quite so ridiculous? And on the way through, you've got all these wretched lawyers and people like that who are pork barreling and living on the back of our productive society, which is diminishing every day, unsurprisingly. So somehow we've got to cut away all that, what I call sort of spider's web of legalese, which is holding us back, and get back to caveat emptor, get back to, you and I shaking hands doing a deal. And if I come out better, it's a deal. That's a deal. There's no sort of, 6 months later, you claim that I'd taken advantage of you or anything else. You do the deal, you shake your hand, you're the principal, I'm the principal, deal done. That's how life used to work.
Well, I was saying to my son on the way down, we were talking about some of the businesses we have, and I said to him, I was talking about stealth taxes. With the businesses we run, a bar, we're opening a cafe, we've got the football club, we've got this. And one of the stealth taxes I explained was energy costs. The reason energy costs are high is I put it down to government. That is a stealth tax on my business. But the one I said about, it was quite interesting, is accountancy fees. My accountancy fees are huge. And I explained that without taxation, I don't need an accountant. I can run the accounts of my business. I know the numbers I need to know. I can track them. Maybe I have a bookkeeper do the work for me. But the pressure on the tax system now has become a huge burden on our business. Throw in new regulations that we have, throw in employment laws, it becomes almost impossible to run a small business and make money.
Well, this is where I say what's happening is you're killing productive Britain and handing out. I mean, the DWP, if you knew how they wasted our money, it's unbelievable. But the point is, as you quite rightly say, if you run a business, I mean, I used to be able to do my own tax return.
Yeah.
It was relatively straightforward. You could do it, fill a few boxes in and pay your tax. Everyone happy, no accountant, or maybe it cost you 500 quid or something to get it reviewed. Now, with the tax manual being 21,500 pages long, it's full of loose ends. It's full of basically what I would call sort of, it's open to innumerable interpretation, basically, because one clause says this and another clause says that, and nobody's ever quite certain, which is a charter for accountants to make huge amounts of money. They've been weaponized, so you pay your accountant, like me, huge amounts of money, and what they really are is a tax collector. So, because what's happened is the state has weaponized your advisor against you, and they will always take the safe line. So you will always pay more tax rather than less tax.
Well, they've signed the oath.
Exactly. So, and if there is a tax investigation and they get caught, even with an honest mistake, even though the government makes mistakes left, right, and centre and never judges itself, they will be judged very harshly by HMRC. So, this is where I was trying to explain to the Chancellor across the chamber. I mean, the trouble is she doesn't run a business. What she knows about business could be written on the back of a postage stamp. And at the end of the day, none of these people have had real life experience. It's all head in the clouds, garbage. But, you've got not only HMRC against you, you've got a raft of other government departments against you, and you've got a headwind that people are fighting against. And with all these, rules, regulations, health and safety issues, if you run any business in farming like me or contracting like me, you have all this stuff where as a board, you've got huge legal liability now. So in a way, we're doing everything we can to kill productive, innovative Britain and then hand it out to people who aren't contributing. I mean, isn't that bizarre?
Well, we have the worst bosses. If you
9 million people of working age are not working.
And how many taxpayers are leaving? I mean, I bet within your circles you've got many friends who have said, I've had enough, I'm gone.
I can tell you right now as we sit here, there are 2,500 people queuing to get into Monaco. I don't know how many are queuing to get into Dubai, Italy, Greece, Portugal. They're leaving Britain. So we're losing our best people. We're losing the kingmakers. And what you need the kingmakers. You need the risk takers. You need people who are actually dynamic, who have the energy to go and actually make things happen. And this is the problem with this country. If you're successful, people don't respect that. They actually dislike it. Well, why? In America, you're applauded as somebody who's got energy, and as long as you've made it honestly and you've provided a structure for other people to live as they want to live, what's wrong with that? It's great. It's That's what you want.
I think there's two sides to
You
that.
don't want the state. What you want is a load of high-minded individuals making the right decisions, and that drives the economy. The last thing you want is a flabby bunch of losers, which is what we've now got, who basically hold everybody back. We don't need that.
I think there's a good side to tall poppy syndrome amongst your group of friends. If you've been successful, they try and keep you in check to not turn into a bit of a dick. But I think outside of that, in terms of business, I think we have a political system which has demonized wealth. It's demonized success. We have a tall poppy syndrome. You see it when people debate in politics. They should pay their fair share. People who don't really understand the reality of life, where there is a Laffer curve. And so to me, it's really sad. It's really sad that people who just want to get out there, want to work, want to build something, are attacked constantly by the state in two ways. They're attacked for their success and demonized for their success, but they're taxed for their success in terms of the income they've generated. It's like this Labour Party wants it both ways.
Well, then they take it off you when you die.
Yeah.
So they get you again.
Yeah. Sorry, Con.
So no, I like small state individuals. I mean, the founding fathers of America were the men to watch. Madison, Adams, Jefferson. They were the people who wrote the American Constitution. They actually threw off the fetters of Britain, and we played our cards very badly. They went to. I used it in the House the other day about these wretched council elections that they're trying to delay because they think they know reform's going to win. So I said, well, the Americans actually fought a war of independence on the slogan "No taxation without representation." So tell me, after May, when these people aren't elected, do we have to pay our council tax? Question one. And question two is, what do we call these unelected councillors? So, they get all very fashed up about the fact that, well, that's very sort of inflammatory language. Well, it's not at all. We should have local elections. People should be democratically represented. And if they're not, there's always a danger that we get some form of totalitarian sort of, central planning, which damages all of us. But I really don't like the way Britain's gone. When I was brought up, I think, so I was born in 1957, pretty much post-war. I think everybody had two world wars in Europe, or two wars in Europe, world wars. They just wanted to live their lives. They wanted to they respected each other. They wanted freedom. They wanted peace. And I think what's happened is, and it happens throughout history, as Churchill said, that the farther you look back, the farther forward you can see. Ultimately, people forget very quickly, and I think people have forgotten what it was like after we'd thrown off. In that case, it was Nazi Germany and totalitarianism that way. Latterly, then it was communism we threw off. Again, another form of totalitarianism. And what we mustn't ever do is forget how fragile our freedom is. And what we've done is, I think we've forgotten that. And actually, it's being gradually taken away from us because we're not fighting for it enough. And I hope people will stand up now and start to fight. It's very encouraging, that today I was on the tube and some chap came up to me and said, "Are you Rupert Lowe?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'm 26 and I really love what you're doing." And I said, "Well, that's very kind of you." And the young people are seeing it. They want their freedom. And I think they're right to be turning to reform. They've got a chance of getting their freedom back with reform. There is no chance with the Uniparty, as I call it, the Reds and the Blues in Parliament. They are two cheeks of the same backside, as George Galloway so elegantly said, and they are not going to lead us to the promised land. We need change.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
What's your reason? Do you think the young people are coming to you? Because Connor, they're 20 years old, is a perfect example. Why do you think they're coming?
Well, because we stand for change, and we need change from outside Parliament. So Parliament has become moribund. It's become. So what's happened is, first of all, Tony Blair and I call them the sort of Blair, Brown, Campbell, Mandelson, and Derry Irvine. They're certainly not the famous five. I'd call them the malign five. And they introduced a load of legislation which effectively empowered the state, empowered quangos, and undermined Parliament. So they took power from Parliament's supposed to be omnipotent. So the elected members of Parliament are supposed to basically make the decisions. Everything's supposed to go through Parliament, but now it doesn't. It all goes through these quangos that cost billions or hundreds of billions of pounds a year to run. And they've taken power away. They're not elected, by the way.
I'd Liz Truss said it'll be the same thing.
It started with then. I mean, I don't even take John Major seriously. So Maggie, when John Major took over, he then won an election which he should never have won. He had a soapbox he used to carry around. You're probably too young to remember.
No, I know. I listened to his interview recently.
But he carried this wretched soapbox around. He should have lost, and Neil Kinnock should have won. But anyway, he won by 15 seats, I think. And he's a disaster, John Major. But I mean, he didn't have enough time to do any damage. So by 97, when Blair got in and we got all the old, things can only get better, Tony Blair in tears outside number 10, Peter Mandelson, the sort of the face of Labour evil, as I call him. He was there as well. At the end of the day, these guys, they changed Britain. So we got the Human Rights Act, we got the Equalities Act, we got the Bribery Act, which they started. Actually, the Tories finished it off. Then we got the coalition, Cameron and Clegg. I mean, do either of them know what they are? Does Clegg believe he's a Lib Dem, and does Cameron believe he's a Tory? I think there's probably something in the middle between them. But Cameron then hollowed out the Tory party. So you had the Labour Party selection processes were changed, and they used basically quotas, not merit. So merit got chucked out of the window, and it was quotas, and whether they were sexual or whether they were colour, race, whatever, religion, whatever. They wanted to try and sort of put together a representative piece of cake, and it should always be based on merit. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are. If you've got the merit, if you're able to do the job and you're the best person to do the job, you should get the job. I don't think there should be any other yardstick. But what they've done is they've hollowed out Parliament. So I think, looking at it, and I shouldn't be having to do this. I'm 67 years old. I look at Parliament and it's just dysfunctional. And with the help of my team, and I've got a great team, one of whom is here today, we've been asking questions because we thought
you've been upsetting them.
We've asked a lot of questions. We don't get answers to all of them because they don't answer the ones which are so shocking. But do you know what I think? I actually think, and I look at the ministers when I ask these questions across the chamber when we get the answers back. I think the civil service know the answers, but I don't think the front bench ministers know the answers because of 26 of them, only 3 of them have got a modicum of business experience. I would personally disregard it as irrelevant, but they say they've got some business experience, whether it's running a PR company or some other bullshit. But the fact is, they don't know what's going on. So what's supposed to happen is the ministers are supposed to hold the civil service to account. As Maggie said, advisors advise, but ministers decide. That's not what's happening. So the civil service has become this self-serving sort of body, which is far too big. There are far too many of them. They're far too infected with all the sort of wokery and the DEI and all the other garbage that's now, infesting Britain. And they know the facts. But I think I look at, for instance, Yvette Cooper's face when we ask these questions, and I think, you didn't know the answer to that, did you?
Well, they hadn't looked themselves.
I don't think they are asked themselves. I don't think they know themselves. And all they're interested in doing is skating over the surface. Meanwhile, the civil service's legs are paddling away underneath, doing exactly what they want because they're not being held to account. So I think not only is government too big, it's actually now malign. I actually think it is not doing what it should be doing, serving the people. I actually think it's working against the people.
Yeah.
That's my view.
But why do you think young people? Because I've got 2 reasons why I think young people are coming to reform. But I'm wondering why you think.
Well, do you want to stay with that moribund mess? I mean, look, I'm old enough. I can probably I can probably scrabble through for the next 15 or 20 years and it's not going to affect me. But these people can't.
They can't get on the housing ladder.
Young men and women can't get on the housing ladder. They see the old baby boomers living in all the best addresses. They're getting their pensions. They're having to work harder and harder to pay for these very rich baby boomers' pensions, which they've got, which, as we know, the state pensions are fraud. It's a put and take scheme. It's already gone up from 65 to 67. And it's going to go on up. So by the time they come to retire, the chances are it'll be probably more like 75. Because if you have a put and take scheme, actuarially, you can pay while you've got the baby boomers paying in and you've got less people retiring. But the minute you've got more people retiring, less people working, you either have to put up what goes in, which is putting up national insurance, or you have to extend the retirement age, or extend it beyond where it is at the moment.
I think there's another reason, by the way.
So I actually think all of the dynamics are against the young. And if that's the case, you might as well vote for change. You've got nothing to lose.
I think there's another reason, is that you're talking to them as well. So I can follow you on Twitter and you follow me back and I can send you a message and you come in here and have this conversation. No holds barred. You haven't really asked for questions in advance. I can ask you anything and you're just going to sit here and answer and you're going to talk to them. And that's going to go out onto the platforms they're watching. My son isn't watching Sky News. He isn't watching Newsnight. He's on Twitter and he's seeing clips and he's listened to podcasts. And so his friends.
Well, Sky's now owned by Comcast, another woke organisation.
But trying to get anyone from the Labour or the Conservative Party onto a podcast, you have to go through handlers, you have to go through PR teams, and it's so hard to get them to talk because I think they're so scared of talking publicly because they're so scared of losing their seat. I can contact Nigel. I've had Richard Tyson here. It's very easy to contact Reform and have a no-holds-barred conversation, and you talk to them directly in their language and about the problems they're seeing without fear. And so the distance between you and a voter like Connor, well, at the moment, it's a matter of feet, but generally it's a lot smaller than the distance between the front bench of the Conservative and the Labour Party. They aren't really talking to the voters. They are talking to the interviewers from the corporations. And that's a big difference.
Well, they are, and they're serving themselves. That's the difference. So, I'm fortunate. I've been reasonably successful, and I don't need the £92,000 parliamentary salary.
You give it to charity, right?
I give it to a Great Yarmouth Charities, although this month we've made an exception, and we've given it to Maggie Oliver, who's been doing a lot for these grooming gangs, which... Look, obviously we'd all heard of it. I call them Pakistani rape gangs, which reduces people on the other side of the chamber to tears because they say it's bald language which isn't necessary. Well, I think it is necessary, and I think it's a stain on the country that we haven't dealt with it. And there are people who should have been brought to book, not just the perpetrators, but also the people who presided over. The police, the courts, the local councillors, basically social services, everybody who's turned a blind eye to this. And whether they've turned a blind eye to it because, you've got Sharia courts now and you can just forget about, let them get on with it, which again, by the way, there should be no Sharia courts in this country. They should all disappear. Come live here, you live by our laws.
92 of them, is there?
92 Sharia courts. Disgrace. Got to go. And what we need people integrating. They either come here and integrate, or they go home. We don't need, basically, isolated communities running their own show in the middle of our country. That doesn't work for me. If you want to come here, live by our rules, live by our laws, integrate. That's fine, and contribute. And there are many people who do that, but there are quite a growing number of people who don't. So look, I think the grooming gangs, we give it to that. Otherwise, we give it to Great Yarmouth, which is, again, my constituency. I went east. I'm not from Great Yarmouth. I'm actually from Oxford. I'm an Oxford boy. I was at the Dragon School and then Radley.
I'm a Reading boy.
Are you? Well,
I was born in Reading.
We're at Thames Valley boys.
Yeah, but I actually live in Bedford my whole life.
I was born in Reading. You're a Thames Valley boy then.
Yeah.
So... But no, so we give it each month to a different Great Yarmouth charity. So Labour have made it quite easy. They've had to go at basically the pensioners, so we gave it to a pensioners charity. They've had to go at small businesses. They've had to go at farmers. They've had to go at education. I mean, each month we find a reasonably easy charity to give it to because Labour's been damaging the interests of most of Britain.
The incentives when you're an MP who doesn't need the salary must be very, very different from somebody who is trying to establish their career, because you can operate without I mean, excuse my language, but given a fuck, really. You don't need the money, you don't need the career, you want what's right for the country.
Well, I think that's what Parliament probably used to be. I think you had a group of people who were like-minded. They'd probably been successful. They were well respected in their area, well known in their area. So there you had an almost sort of a self-policing mechanism, because people, if they weren't good men, they didn't get put into the position where they were the member of Parliament. People argue that it meant privileged people and rich people got into Parliament, but if you look at the Lords, and I don't have the answer on the Lords. I don't agree with all this Lords bashing. I think there are some very capable people in the Lords. And as you probably know, the way we were structured, our constitution is unwritten. So post the Civil War, you basically had the king as your titular head. You had Parliament as the omnipotent body, as I said earlier. And then you had the Lords, who provided guidance to the Commons. And actually in the Lords you had these hereditary peers who do read a lot of the legislation, who do check the legislation, and who are effectively a backstop on bad and malign legislation getting through the House of Commons. So there was a certain logic to it, but as you know, I mean, there's the talk of getting away with the Lords. They've already got away with got rid of a lot of it. And now they're talking about getting rid of the rest of the hereditaries and ultimately, in the end, changing the way in which that chamber operates. Now, I think there are far more important things to be doing as far as reforming the country goes than having a go at the Lords. I mean, whatever one's views of the Lords. But if I was young, I would be voting for change. Look, I'm delighted Connor's a reform voter.
Oh, no, I don't know if he is yet. I'm not going to answer for him, but yeah.
Well, he may be.
Never voted.
He's never voted, yeah.
Well, again, you've got to start taking some responsibility. One man, one vote. You don't vote. You can't blame the people in Parliament for getting it wrong.
Well, the interesting thing is, I think I don't know what it's like on the inside, but the Overton window on reform has changed hugely. Go back just a few years. It was in quiet circles. You would whisper if you were considering voting for reform. I think there was kind of a view, probably caused by the media, that, well, you must be a Brexit idiot, or you must be right wing, or a bit of a racist. But I think the media attacks are failing now on attacking reform. And I think the likes of yourself and Richard and Nigel and the other members, what you've done in terms of focusing on policy has been really good. So much so that you had the YouGov Sky News poll yesterday that for the first time put the Reform Party as the front runner at 25%, which I think is really interesting, because the trajectory is now, it's not like you are a viable, legitimate opposition. So, I mean, I could ask you, do you think you're going to win the next election? I know you're going to say you will.
I've said it for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, my friends used to laugh at me when I said I was going to win a seat for reform. I stood in Kingswood and we got 10.4%. I actually stood originally for the referendum party because I got a thing in my bonnet about losing the pound, which would have been the end of Britain if we'd lost the pound in 97.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Goldsmith never gets the credit for, he spent, I think, £50 million, and a lot of the material we produced in 97 was the same as the material we ended up almost producing for the Vote Leave campaign. It just changed, from basically losing your currency to losing your sovereignty. And it was, in the end, he funded it. That's why we had the referendum. So he actually, the three parties before the 97 election, I got 6.6% in the Cotswolds where I live, which, I mean, most of them are bonehead Tories that you put a monkey in blue clothing and put him up, he'd get elected. I mean, there's a man called Geoffrey Clifton Brown, who's our local MP, who's been in Parliament forever, who I see now in Parliament. So, it moved from saving the pound, and then I think at the end of the day, I said we'd win a seat. I have won a seat with the help of the good people of Great Yarmouth, who I now have a very good relationship with. But I've said for a while we're going to win the election. We have to win the election, because if we don't win the election, I'm not sure we can rescue the country now, but if we have another period of the Uniparty, beyond 29, then I think the country will self-immolate. I think it's on a catastrophic course. I'm expecting our currency to collapse at any stage. Our economy's, I think, going to become very weak. There's no confidence, no investment. Why would you invest in Britain at the moment? It's getting much weaker. So I think we are going to win the election. We have moved, as you say, the Overton window because we've got into Parliament. That's the key move of reform, I think. Until we got into Parliament, nobody saw us in the chamber. Nobody saw that we were talking common sense. And for people who say, well, you haven't got any policies, I say to them, go and read our contract with the people and then come back and tell me whether you think our policies make sense or not.
But again, you've got grip of the
media.
They do.
They come back and they go, that's a great document. I go, all we are is the common sense party. We just want the return of common sense.
But you've got a grip of the media as well, because you have to have a grip of the media, because if you're not dictating the media will dictate what people think about you.
Well, yes, but I haven't, and my mistake at Southampton, if I made one, was I assumed people would watch what the hands were doing, not what the mouth was saying. So I didn't do much media.
Yeah.
I actually hardly appeared in the media. I thought my job was to basically structure the football club correctly, make the right decisions, and build up the youth academy, which is what I actually enjoyed far more than the first team. I mean, I always thought the first team were slightly sort of Billy Big Bollocks, and the youth academy, I bought a hotel, we structured it, we turned out, because you can't win anything with bad people, so you have to get good people, and we got some very good people. You look at Gareth Bale, and you look at Theo Walcott, and you look at a lot of the boys who came through our academy. They're very good people, even the ones who didn't make it, the Lloyd Jameses and the Andrew Sermons. They're very clever, decent people who've been brought up properly. So I think on that score, reform has to win. We have to win.
How though? Because
we will. We're going to win. The question then is, we have to have a plan when we've won.
Well, I think you have to plan to win as well, because you need hundreds of seats.
If we win, we have to have a plan, and the plan has to be quite radical, and the plan has to involve knowing exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to do it immediately. So if you look at Donald Trump is your metric on that. So Donald Trump, first time round, he had whatever it was, 15 people ready to go when he got elected, because nobody believed he was going to win. Well, he won. Mm-hmm. And then he didn't, and running a country, as you know, it's hard enough running a company, let alone a country. But, running a country, he didn't know what to do. But a bit like Maggie, as she got elected more and more, she worked out how much power she had. And actually, you have more power here than you have, because we have an unwritten constitution, than you have in America, where they have a written constitution. But the second time round, now he's won. How many people do you think he had ready to go? I understand he had 3,500 people ready.
There's 5,000 seats
ready to go day one, and look what he's doing. He's not messing about. So he's the model, but we haven't got the luxury, probably, of 2 election victories. So we have to make it count on the first victory. We have to have a plan. We have to have a structure. And this is and we have to have the right people in Parliament, and we have to have proper leadership and proper organisation. And if we're exposed in any way, it is the fact that we've got a huge job to do to refine our policy, which to me is absolutely essential. And that's our policy across the board, how we deal with it constitutionally to how we deal with each of the policy areas. And obviously the overriding theme will be common sense and less government. But we then have to have a properly structured party that functions correctly, because it won't be an easy ride. And people, a bit like a drug addict, when you come off drugs, it can be pretty unpleasant. And I think this country has got used to a welfare state that basically is completely out of control. Mm-hmm. And that emanates from the post-war era, where we had, the genesis of the welfare state, the genesis of the NHS. And by the way, the NHS needs total reform. It's dysfunctional, and it's a huge elephant on all our backs. It's actually a fraud, as I've said in the past. I don't know about you, but we can't get a doctor's appointment.
We have a private doctor.
We have a private doctor, so we're all paying our national insurance, but we're actually outsourcing our medical treatment.
Yeah,
that's a fraud. You or I did that in the private sector. What would they do? The regulator would be all over you like a cheap suit.
Yeah.
So, but they don't apply the same rules themselves because it's free. They say, no, it's not free. You pay your national insurance. That's not free. It's costing a fortune.
Well, I mean, national insurance itself is stupid because it just goes into the same pot now.
Well, it goes into the tax pot.
Yeah.
It's like the roads. Your road tax goes into the tax pot. Why do you think we've got so many potholes? So, look, the state it's malign. It's our enemy. It should be serving us, but it's our enemy. That's what's happened.
So when you win,
I've just told you that's the biggest challenge now, and Zia Yusuf, who I don't know well, he's been brought in to bring that structure, to get it all properly set up so that we actually do have functioning selection of our candidates. That's the first thing to do.
So I find that strange that you say you don't know him that well.
Well, we're so busy, doing our own thing in Parliament and things. Have you ever tried to sit in Parliament and get a question or make a statement?
I don't know how Parliament works.
Give a speech? Well, let me tell you. The one thing that the Labour Party has got is they control the agenda in Parliament.
Is it true?
So sometimes when you see me speaking, I've had to sit on my backside in the chamber for 5 hours to get that speech or get that question or get that statement, whatever. Because they can change, they can put in a ministerial statement, they can put in an urgent question, they can do whatever they want, and they can change the agenda. So I had an MHRA debate with Esther McVeigh. The government, again, their COVID response of Boris and his lot, and both parties, really, all the parties, Lib Dems as well, was shocking. I mean, I'm not jabbed. That experimental nonsense that these young people didn't need was a joke, but it was very hard to avoid it. So I think the whole COVID response was a scam. They wasted 400 billion of our money. A lot of it's been fraudulently spent on, bounce back loans they'll never collect back. And the whole thing's a huge scandal. So we had the debate, the MHRA debate. They don't want that debate. And now we've got COVID damaged people coming forward. So there's at least, I think it's 500,000 people have come forward, with complaints of myocarditis, strokes, whatever it is, lots of things. And I think that'll increase because I think it was a very damaging experimental jab, both obviously AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Pfizer. However, we were supposed to have a 3-hour debate. We got a backbench business debate, and all scheduled 3 hours. Suddenly, there's an urgent statement on a Thursday, highly unusual. Then there's a debate on, I think it was gay members of the military or something, where 25 people wanted to speak. So suddenly, we didn't have time to do our debate, so it's put off, deferred.
Until when?
Till another date. We have had it now. It's supposed to be 3 hours on the following date. We were supposed to be the first debate. Then suddenly, again, it gets telescoped. So I had three speeches in my pocket. I had a 12-minuter, an 8-minuter, and a 5-minuter. Which one do you think I ended up having? Spot on.
So you didn't get to have the proper debate?
We didn't get to have the proper debate because they didn't want the debate. And this is the power of a government that basically can control the parliamentary agenda. And whilst I like Sir Lindsay very much, I think he's an extremely good speaker. He is a Labour MP, and he does rely on the goodwill of the Labour Party to remain a speaker.
How do you reform that, though? Because that starts to feel undemocratic.
Well, my view is it should be an independent role, so a bit like a chairman's role. And I did go and see him because, as you probably watch, and people can watch the Prime Minister's questions. Do you think they answer the questions? No, not at all. They just give us some verbal baby food and sit down again. Now, if you're a good chairman, you'd say, I went and saw Sir Lindsay and I said, either you should intervene as chairman and say you haven't answered the question, please answer the question. Otherwise, Parliament's not functioning properly. Or you have to give the MP who's asked the question the right of reply to say you haven't answered my question. Please answer my question. But you can't just let it pass. Otherwise, it brings Parliament into disrepute. I think it does. Parliament, if you're asked a question in a court of law and you don't answer it, what do they do? They keep going until you do answer it. You're required to answer it.
Is it true with Southport you were blocked from asking certain questions as well?
We were told before Parliament opened that we were not allowed to ask a question about the Southport issue because it was sub judice and it was a legal matter. That was what we were told by the Speaker at the opening of Parliament. But as you probably know, we did stand up and we did try and do our bit to make sure that the policemen involved, who I think behaved very well, were treated properly. And I think there has now been progress made on that, but it was very slow, and arguably it wasn't handled in the way I think it should have been handled. I mean, personally, having watched the video footage of it, I think the people who broke the police lady's nose and who were violent were very lucky not to have been shot. And I think the police showed huge restraint in not doing that.
Very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
I do want to get back to the things that Reform will do when they win. But actually, there's another question. Because I started thinking about what is. I wanted to ask you what is the role of government, and I will ask you that. But actually, I also
what are we going to do? The most important thing is the Great Repeal Act, followed by national restoration. That's what we're going to do.
No, but before that, also, actually, what is the role of the electorate? We talk about the role of government, but actually, democracy requires us as the electorate.
Well, I say
contribute.
This to people. I said you can't rely on 5 of us in Parliament to do it all for you. You got to stand up, and I've said it on Twitter. If you don't agree with what your local council's doing, challenge. If you don't agree with anything you see from either local or national government, challenge. If you in true English or British style, you just accept it, it's going to carry on. But I do think, it's a very good question, I do think people need to stand up now, because we're not sort of, Charles Atlas. We can't carry the whole world with us. What we need is other people to start challenging as well. And we're challenging in Parliament. We've now got the bridgehead and we can build on that. And people can now see that, with some common sense and some people with experience, the right questions can be asked. But people can't just sit there and expect life to change unless they fight for it. I mean, how many things have you achieved without fighting for them?
Nothing.
Not many.
Whatever my father gave me.
Well, there you go.
But I think we've kind of seen it with the various riots. I think sometimes the riots have been an outlet for years of frustration that have bubbled up with certain instances. Again, the Southport riots, I think, were a combination of issues that came together where people are just angry. And I feel like the nation, I don't know if you sense this from inside Parliament, but I feel like we're fragile now, and anything could trigger the public to another bout of riots or protests. Do you
Well, I
sense
think the public's got the right to protest if they're not happy. I mean, as long as it's done peacefully, I don't that there should be any reason that they shouldn't show their displeasure. I mean, when I don't know about you, but I'm a keen country sportsman. I do lots of things. I have a farm, and I love the countryside. I don't personally hunt, which I know is one of the things that creates huge division. But I do shoot, and I do fish, and I do, participate in country sports. And when Tony Blair tried to ban fox hunting, which again, in my view, is anti-democratic, a million of us came up to London at the weekend, and we marched peacefully through the streets to show that we didn't approve of that. And we shouldn't have to do that, because it shows government's not functioning when that happens. I actually got caught in a protest yesterday from the lads in their white vans, with whom I had a lot of sympathy, complaining about the fact their tools are being stolen out of their vans and nobody's doing anything about it. Kept me sitting outside Parliament for about 20 minutes, and they were blocking Parliament Square. So I think people should make, like the farmers, I encourage the farmers, keep turning the heat up, turn the Bunsen up slowly, don't do anything illegal, but make your presence felt. Don't just let this Labour government break the backbone of British farming, break the backbone of British small businesses. Don't accept that. And what they're doing is a scam. And it's not based on any logic or fairness. It's based on envy and basically, horrible Labour cant, which is nonsense. And I did go and see Daniel Zeitner to try and talk reason with him. But after 20 minutes, he looked me in the eye and he said, "Rupert, I just want you to know that I think very often the public sector is more efficient than the private sector." So I said to him, "Well, if you think that, Daniel, I'm leaving." And I got up and walked out. Absolute, complete waste of time trying to reason with people like that.
Well, just a lot of people don't really understand that it is the private sector that funds the public sector.
The private sector drives everything.
Yeah.
The public sector is a dead weight. It is non-productive. It is a cost. The private sector is driven by the profit motive. And it is the profit motive that actually creates a sensible society. Not usury and not in unfairness, but a profit motive that drives people to basically make decisions, take risk, invest, and actually create what Britain used to be, which was a society that was at peace with itself and knew what it was. I think we've lost that in a way.
So reform wins. What do you think the focus would and should be those first 100, 150 days?
We have to have a ruthless plan for the first 100 days. So I think we need to get those people with policy experience, people with expertise in obviously constitutional law, pensions, building, because the actual planning system is completely broken. I don't know if you know about that.
Oh, I know.
They're more fixated with sort of, rewilding and biodiversity net gain than they are in actually anything logical or sensible. And newts and bats and all the other, or a load of other nonsense. But and it's actually run by people who don't know which way is up. So we need to download and get help from people who've got policy expertise, who feel strongly, distill that into a proper policy document, which will be a refinement on our contract with the people. And the reason we called it the contract with the people is that all the parties break their manifestos, so we didn't want to call it a manifesto, so we called it a contract with the people.
Do you know, I often think, why shouldn't we force people to put their manifestos out, including their budget, pre-election? This is the budget, rather than a budget post-election.
Well, I think that was a nonsense what she did with the budget. I mean, would you basically become an elected government and then hang around from July the 4th till November, whatever it was, to have your budget, talking about how you're going to raise taxes, basically undermining the economy, creating uncertainty, and encouraging people basically to cash in and leave? Why not, as you quite rightly say, give us your budget before the election and then deliver the budget? Then there's no uncertainty. But that was the most extraordinary thing. And now she's trying to talk it up again. But let me tell you, there is no way ever in history has a government centrally planned a recovery. The worrying thing is, and I'm reading some research which I get each month from a wonderful man called Mark Faber. And, the truth is that America is now, their money supply is now rising again. And if you notice this week, they're talking about cutting interest rates. Right? This is the beginning, I think, of where sterling starts to weaken. I'm amazed at how strong it's been. So I think we're heading for a sterling crisis. I think we're heading, obviously, for an economy that doesn't grow. And the only way you get a growing economy, by the way, is proper, long-term private sector investment. That's how you get growth.
I mean, look.
And there is none happening at the moment, trust me. People are pulling out. You saw AstraZeneca yesterday pulled out. And why would you invest here with a front bench of Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner? You've got Rachel Reeves humming one thing, but HMRC are singing a totally different tune. They're crunching the private sector for tax. They're pursuing everybody for every penny. They're resiling on EIS approvals that she says they're happy to help foster young businesses. I can tell you, they've pre-approved at least 4 that I know of, and then they've resiled on it once people have raised the money. So no, HMRC are a law unto themselves. And, you've got Lammy and the Chagos Islands. What are we doing? You've then got, Bridget Phillipson. Half these people think that, men can be women and women can be men. They don't believe in the concept of men and women, which was one of the things I loved about Trump. He said they can only be men and women. There's no DEI anymore. He's going to disband all that. I think what they're finding out with USAID is that you clearly had a government department that was basically in with all of the World Economic Forum, and they were intent on undermining everything that you and I believe in with regard to a sovereign government that represents libertarian Western values. They don't want that. They're actually actively undermining what we all want. So look, and by the way, it'll be worse here when we get in and we start the Doge program here. I mean, God knows what we're going to find in the Home Office and in the DWP and in, I think the DWP, from what we can learn, are just handing out money like confetti to anybody who applies for it. So look, Reform's job, we are under no illusions, I'm not anyway, about how big a job we've got, and we probably won't have that much goodwill in terms of, we'll have goodwill initially, but it won't last that long, because I as I said to you earlier, I don't see us reaching the sunny uplands for some time. You've often got to go through a period of pain. Yeah. And if you look at what Thatcher did, I mean, in a way, I've always thought she only survived because of the Falklands War. I mean, what I call Tory wets were ganging up to get rid of her in 82, but she then went to war in the Falklands, which she won, and then she was untouchable. And there's a very good book for those people who want to read about that period of our history called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow by John Knott, which is a brilliant book, and it tells you everything. And again, the young have forgotten that period, but I remember driving down to Gloucestershire with my wife. My wife now, I got married in 86. We were going out in 82 then. And, when Maggie said she was sending in the task force, I went, yes, finally we're standing up for what we believe in. So she stood up, she gave us national pride. We sorted out the Falklands. And at the end of the day, she then won the next 2 elections. And as I said to you earlier, she worked out how much power she had. And by the way, when you get elected here, you have got tremendous power if you care to use it.
I think there's 2 groups of people in the UK who are looking at Trump in America. I think there's a group of, I call them small C conservatives, traditional conservative voters, probably now considering reform or disillusioned, who are looking at America now and thinking, I want some of that. Firm leadership, tough decisions.
I wouldn't say we want it, we need it.
Well, need it want as well.
We want it. We want and need it.
But there's another group who look at it with absolute fear. They think this is fascism. They think Trump's crazy. They don't seem to understand leadership or basic economics.
Well, do you think they fear a sort of society of interfacing individuals? Do you think they feel...
A meritocracy.
Yes, a meritocracy. Do you think they fear that they are in any way dysfunctional or inferior? Is that their worry?
I think there's a lot of people who've been brainwashed and thinking the world works a certain way, who've probably never run a business, had to make payroll, had to make tough decisions, have to run a family. I just think there is and I think it's a cancer that comes from our academia. And I think we breed...
Well, there's a lot of trouble there, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't think we breed a basic understanding of economics. I don't think we have enough firm, tough leadership anymore. And I look across I look what Bukele's done in El Salvador. I look what Milei's doing in Argentina. And I look with envy, thinking, where are the...
Well, Javier's another man who we communicate with on Twitter.
Oh, do you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I've been out to there. I made a documentary on inflation out there. I met his economic advisor. I haven't met him. I met his economic advisor.
But did you study Argentina and how
of course.
In 1920s it was one of the richest countries on earth?
One of the richest in the world. Yeah.
It's actually, if you've been to Argentina, they've got the most unbelievable agriculture up in Cordoba. You've got literally flat plains of double cropped, incredibly fertile, in the lee of the Andes. It's unbelievable country. It's got everything. but it was destroyed by socialism, a bit like Venezuela.
Venezuela. I've been there as well.
But I think we've been running what I call a reverse Darwinian scam here. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously we don't necessarily want to go full on Darwinian. I mean, Charles Darwin, another of my heroes, I love reading about him and the Galapagos Islands and everything, and fantastic what he did there. But I think we've gone reverse Darwin. And I think with everything we do, we have basically upset the balance of, you know, the strong versus the weak. And arguably we have promoted weakness far too much.
We've clipped the strong. But obviously, you know, you look at Victorian Britain, it was obviously the opposite. You had people who did believe in enterprise, and Britain at that time probably was a country which nobody will ever eclipse the wealth that we had at that period of time. But they actually had their own safety networks through the friendly societies. They were very advanced, all private sector, nothing to do with the state. So I always think more evil is perpetrated in the name of the state. Individuals don't tend to perpetrate. They do sometimes. I mean, you obviously get Hitler and Stalin. But on the whole, if you employ people, do you treat them badly? No, because they won't work for you. Do you look after them if they're you looking after? Yes, of course you do, because you know, like we've got a family business that's over 100 years old. A lot of the people who worked there were my father's friends. It's fallen to me to keep it going. I mean, the family hasn't had a dividend for 30 years. They all get paid every week. And it's a great business. It's got the royal warrant. But those people are part of our extended family. They while we can, we will always help and support them. The quid pro quo is every now and again you need to make a profit, or it destroys itself. So you know, you obviously have to find balance, and I think that therefore that's why humans always find their own level. The state, you can have nasty little people in ivory towers who do horrible things and without any justification. So I have a fear of the state. I hate statism. You know, I'm an Austrian school economist. I believe always totally in the individual, and I will always. That's why the Constitution of America is so great. At every turn, it is debit the state, credit the individual. Debit the state, credit the individual. Because federal government, since the New Deal, that wretched Roosevelt deal, they undermined the 9th and 10th Amendment. Federal government's grown like a cancer. And, you know, it is actually now a malign influence in the US, and hopefully Trump, Musk, and the lads will do something about that too.
At Leaden, we've built the best Bitcoin-backed loan platform in the world. Proven, trusted, growing. Leaden's proven track record speaks for itself. Visit Leaden.io/Mr. Obnoxious to get started. Leaden, there is no second best. Leaden is not regulated in the United Kingdom. Any credit products or virtual asset services provided by Leaden are not subject to UK regulatory protections. Please consider the risks associated with virtual assets and consult a financial advisor before making any decisions.
So if you're an Austrian proponent of Austrian economics, are you a proponent of sound money? Do you believe in a sound money standard?
I'll tell you what I think on money. I think Britain was at its most powerful when we had private money. So I actually do believe you can privatize money. And I actually think the Bank of England, all the central banks, I think they're a pervasive evil. And they distort money. So when Britain, and really the concept of banking was, if you were a Rothschild or you were a banker, you spent your entire life building up your reputation. You did one thing wrong and all the money left your bank, you went bust. So I actually do believe in privatized money. I mean, it's probably a bridge too far at the moment, given the sort of centrally planned nature of the way we all live our lives.
Well, but it exists already.
Where?
So I keep all my money in Bitcoin.
Well, we've got crypto.
Well, I say Bitcoin rather than crypto because crypto is a world of scams and bullshit and nonsense. Bitcoin to me is the only legitimate cryptocurrency because it's the only one with meaningful decentralization, keeping the power away from the state. That is private money.
Well, I have to confess I'm not an expert on crypto, but I did go to a crypto dinner the other day where I warned them. I said, you'll grow very nicely while you're a private sector operation, but the minute the government starts to regulate you, your game's over.
Well, they have already to some extent. I mean, the banks themselves are so fearful of Bitcoin that a lot of the banks won't even let you access the exchanges. I've had 3 bank accounts closed down. One for receiving a sponsorship payment from a Bitcoin company. Another one because I transferred to an exchange. But you might not know much about this, so I won't press you on it. But I think it's definitely something Reform should take a look at. And I tell you the area you should really take a look at is, with Bitcoin, do you know about this thing, Bitcoin mining?
Yes.
Okay.
Will you use energy to create Bitcoin?
Yes. So
there is, I guess there's a correlation between the cost of energy and Bitcoin.
Yes, there is. But the most interesting part is we were looking at this article this morning on, where is it? It's a bit small there. But we curtail... So we're paying the wind generators £1 billion a year to turn off because we're generating more wind energy.
Well, I know that because I have a battery storage business. So there you go. We have we've got one at Morecambe Bay, which we actually sold. We've got another one we just got up in Scotland. So I know we turn so it's not infrastructure. We've got the infrastructure. Yeah. The grid cannot cope with the energy.
So the fascinating thing...
So they have to spend billions on the grid, but Mad Ed Miliband doesn't talk about how much he's got to spend on the grid to be able to distribute the power.
So in America, specifically in Texas, I know of companies who are taking the Bitcoin miners and they're plugging them in next to them, and rather than curtailing the power, they're buying it from them. And so that money is just going to pure waste. I'm not saying we should go into detail now, but when Reform starts looking at its energy policies, this is something that would be worth looking at.
Well, I think there is certainly a role. I mean, look, I understand the concept of blockchain, and I've been in the city, as you probably know, for quite a lot of my life. So I've sort of, I've worked with deregulating markets when I was on the board of Life from 85 to 88. I was, on the futures exchange. Then I traded Japanese warrants versus futures. So I'd done all this stuff. And I think I can work out the concept, and I can see the logic of having a disciplined currency which cannot be created. Because I have a thing, you probably know I did a 10-minute rule bill on quantitative easing, which is something I really hate. I mean, I hate the fact that the state can do something you and I can't do and create money in our own name and undermine everybody's savings. I personally think that is absolutely outrageous.
So my friend called it universal basic income for rich.
Oh, it's shocking.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, I think what we have to do is not overcomplicate it, but I can see the logic of it, and I can see the logic of, I actually have got a bit of crypto. I hope it's Bitcoin. I had a look at it. It's not Bitcoin. It's not. And I did see a thing where somebody was saying that it's a terrible one, but I put about 9,300. I put 10 grand to Revolut because I'm not really a sort of cyber whiz. So I thought I'll do it through Revolut. and I was in fear of the chap who had his hard drive chucked onto the rubbish heap, and there was whatever there was, a couple of billion quid's worth of money on his hard drive. Anyway, so I thought I'll just learn a bit about it. So I studied, and I thought, well, Ripple, which which I know, I saw a thing where somebody said it was the wrong thing. So I put in about 9,300. I'll just watch it. And so actually recently, that 9,300 appreciated to something like 46,000. It's come back to about 32, 33,000.
Right. I tell you what, take it straight.
So tell me about Ripple.
Well, so to me, it's a scam. It's a fraud. I think Brad Garlinghouse, who runs it, is a compulsive liar. They have funded I saw a clip on that. Somebody said that the other day. Well, there's two things. They funded misinformation campaigns via Greenpeace against Bitcoin. And they have also been undermining the efforts to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the US government. These people, I think they're fundamentally evil. The cryptocurrency Ripple has no purpose. To me, it's a fraud. Personally, he'll probably sue me.
Is that the same with Ethereum then?
I mean, some of them are just, to me, they're just pointless. They're scams. The thing about a blockchain is the reason a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin is built on a blockchain is you're trying to decentralize it, which means you're trying to get it away from the power of the state so it can't be turned off. So even when China bans it, it doesn't end. All other cryptocurrencies failed because they were centralized. Bitcoin is impossible now to turn off because it's meaningfully decentralized. And that is the power of a blockchain. But it's the only one that is. All the others aren't meaningfully decentralized, so they don't need a blockchain.
I think we're going to have to get you into the policy unit to
I spoke to Nigel about this.
To give us all your knowledge, download your knowledge into a policy document.
Well, they have a crypto czar now in the US, David Sachs, who's doing that. Look, there's far better people to speak on than me, and I can introduce you to them. But I do think it's something that's definitely worth looking at, and we can talk about it further.
Look, I agree, and I bank with a bank called Hawes Bank, which is the last private bank in the country with unlimited personal liability, so the partners have. And there's a wonderful letter. You should go into it's in Fleet Street, their branch. And there's a wonderful letter by one of the Hawes. As you know, the Bank of England was formed largely because Charles II was a spendthrift. And we ended up running out of credit. So the only way they could get any credit was to set up the Bank of England. And there's a wonderful letter from one of the Haw family. I think he was called Henry Haw or something. And it's in their museum, where he wrote a fantastic letter challenging the establishment of the Bank of England as a pervasive evil.
Well, okay.
So you should look at that, but I think you should definitely give us your knowledge, because this is the thing: not everybody can know everything, and there are lots of us who have libertarian instincts, who have knowledge in areas, and it's incumbent on you to help hone Reform's policy document.
Yeah, I mean,
using
look,
that.
Bitcoin is a libertarian idea. And
well, then I'm in favour of it.
Well, I mean, whenever you guys need or want, I can come in and talk. But there are far better speakers.
So should I flog the Ripple then?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, look, it might go up and down, but ultimately its trajectory is to zero because it has no utility.
The reason I bought it, I tell you, because from a banking point of view, I thought it was relatively well structured for banks to start doing transfers. Because as you know, bank transfers are a scam. So they sit on the money. They're effectively profiting from inefficiencies in the banking system.
Well, the problem,
and this would have allowed for a much. They did have a problem with the SEC at one time, as you probably know, which I think resolved itself.
Yes.
And hence, I mean, it went right down. So I thought, well, I'll just forget it, write it off. And then suddenly I looked at it. I didn't look at it for about 6 months, and suddenly I looked at it. It was worth 20 grand, and then.
I mean, congratulations. I actually bought Ripple years ago.
Well, I only did it as a little sort of play just to learn about it.
We have a saying, Rupert, if it's not Bitcoin, it's a shitcoin. But the thing is, Ripple, the company themselves, own a large amount of XRP. Their incentive is to convince people it's useful so they can keep selling it and bringing in they've sold billions of it themselves. But ultimately, it won't make the banking system more efficient. The most efficient bank is Bitcoin, because there's no central authority. So even with Ripple, there's a central authority. There's no central authority with Bitcoin. I can send it to you and nobody can stop me.
So it's completely devolved. It is a bit like a private bank in the old days.
It is pure private money. I can send you it. Look, we should.
By the way, I don't agree with banking guarantees. Sort of deposit guarantees.
No, I don't.
I think you're responsible for your own money.
Yeah, well, that's why
put your money in the bank, and the bank goes bust. You lose your money. That's the society I like. That's a Darwinian society.
Yes.
The reverse Darwinian society is where, oh, well, you've lost all your money, bad luck. We'll give you 83,000 or 85,000 euros back or whatever it is.
Well, look, when you and Richard and Nigel want to figure out your Bitcoin crypto strategy, I know the people to bring in to talk to you about it. But I'm conscious of time, and there will definitely be people listening who will really want me to talk to you about immigration. You've focused on this. You've talked about this a lot. There's a lot to get into. We've got 10 minutes. But because you've done all the research, asked a lot of questions, what are the key points that you would want to get across now to people listening? Because I am just conscious our time's limited.
Well, look, I mean, immigration I'm not anti-immigration.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing to say. I've always said that. But what I am anti is low-grade immigrant or people who aren't highly skilled. So immigration, if you have a society that is advanced, it will always have a need for some people who've got skills that is not in that society. So therefore you need a small amount of high-skilled immigration. That adds to so they bring an additional sort of wealth creation element to the country they come to. And you probably know that Australia and New Zealand have very targeted policies on either skill sets or people bringing wealth to their country. So there is a very, very big hurdle to jump over before you can get citizenship in those countries. What's happened here is we've seen our best people, as we discussed earlier, leaving. So your innovators and your wealth creators and your drivers of society are going. And what we've had is a lot of initially what I call, I mean, I don't want to be rude about them because you need people who do all sorts of jobs, but at the end, again, they're not highly skilled labor coming in initially from Europe. And I actually, Poland, I think, is a country which has got potential as long as it doesn't suffer and get caught up in this wretched, situation with Ukraine, Russia, and that part of the world. They've always suffered historically, I think, from being in the wrong place geographically. But actually, the Polish people, I think, I've got a lot of time for them. It seems that the Hungarians are getting their act together a bit as well, because again, they've got a big history, the Hungarians. So a lot of those people are actually now going home. So those Polish people who came and contributed, sent money home, are now going home. But Poland as an economy is developing quite fast, and it's in quite an interesting part of Europe. But what we're now doing is we're bringing in people, and we're a sovereign nation. We have total control over who comes here. We didn't have that before, but we do now. And what we shouldn't be doing is bringing in, and it's not just the illegal migrants that we're talking about. For me, illegal migrants should be detained and deported. If you come here illegally, you're here illegally. Not acceptable. And, I'm very worried that the Labour government's going to have an amnesty, and it's just going to let people who've come here illegally stay here, which again would send a message to other people to come here and try and stay here illegally. No, we should detain and deport. And I tell you, the boats would stop tomorrow because it'd be a waste of them, whatever they spend, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 or whatever they're spending to get a small boat over and risk their lives. You'd stop that overnight. But so I'm very clear that has to be detained, deport, and I've said, put them on an island in a suitable part of the UK, give them a bowl of porridge and a tented camp, and let the midges do the rest. But that's a sort of worst case situation. But detain, deport, come here illegally, don't stay. No, we have to apply legally. If you're a foreign criminal in our prison, deport. Don't come here and commit crime. I think there's 10,500 foreign criminals in our prisons.
Just on that one, before or after the sentence, because there is an argument that somebody may have committed a horrific crime. If you deport them, they won't be sentenced in another country.
Well, I'm only looking at it from today, so we know from our questions that there are 10,500 foreign criminals in our prisons, and meanwhile we're letting out criminals early because we haven't got the room in our prisons, so they can go, deport them. Why do you want to keep them? They've actually come here and they've committed a crime.
I think some people think, if someone committed a horrific crime, they're a child predator, rapist, murderer. If you deport them, you're unleashing a dangerous person onto the streets elsewhere. There's kind of like a moral responsibility to that.
We give foreign aid, as I've said, to Pakistan. I think we gave £133 million last year.
You want to ensure they would be in prison in the other countries.
You tell them that, there is a deal. You take these people back. They're your problem as well as our problem. They're your citizens. You deal with them.
By the way, have you seen the El Salvador announcement today? They've offered to outsource the incarceration of prisoners from the US to El Salvador because they can operate them at a much lower cost.
Well, there you go. So look, but then the real problem that has happened is legal migration, which now, why that's been allowed to happen again, I think it's a bad reflection on, first of all, the Tory front bench, and latterly the Labour front bench.
There you go.
So, it's frightening, isn't it? So this is legal migration, and it happened despite the fact that Cameron, May, Boris, they all said they would reduce legal migration, but in fact, it went completely bonkers.
Do you think this was to protect GDP?
I honestly, again, it's not about GDP; it's about GDP per capita. If you,
we know that.
If you bring these people in, they are a cost. They're a cost to the economy. They're not a benefit.
But do you think that's why they did it? Because they wanted a better headline GDP
I
figure?
honestly don't know. I don't know whether it was incompetence. I don't know. Whether as I said to you, whether the front bench was aware of what was happening in their name, at the Home Office. I honestly don't know, but it is gross negligence to say you're going to reduce legal immigration and then preside over that. That is quite shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's a fairly simple thing to solve. I think the toughest question that I've seen put, and it certainly I think it's been put to Nigel, is the idea of mass deportation. I think that's just as a subject, some people find that uncomfortable. How do you feel about these ideas of?
Well, I'm in favour of deporting people who are illegally. Whether you call it deportation or mass deportation is meaningless. Frankly, they've got to go, and they're here. If you're here illegally, you go. Yeah. Don't come here illegally. Come if you want to come here, apply legally, and then we can decide whether you're going to add benefit to our society. And if we don't think you are, don't come here. So stay at home. And if you don't agree with our culture and our laws and the way we live our lives, and you don't speak our language, that's another big issue, by the way. Mm-hmm. Come here, you've got to learn English. You've got to speak English. And our hospitals should be dealing in English. All our government departments should be dealing in English and English alone. It's not up to the taxpayer to be funding translation for people who don't speak English. No. We are an English-speaking country. You come here, you speak English, you live by our laws, and you effectively respect what we are. Otherwise, go home.
I'm really conscious of time. I've got 2 more questions. I think a lot of Labour voters, if they understood the consequences and what the policies of socialism actually meant, they wouldn't vote for it because it actually undermines what I think their belief system is. You as a politician, do you consider ways to try and convince people who are maybe from the left that their ideas and their policies won't work? Do you make an effort to convert them? Do you have a message for them?
Well, look, I mean, they're driven like me by common sense. I mean, that's something which I think for me is incredibly important. But I do think what you tend to see with these socialist or communist societies is that they destroy the sort of work ethic. They destroy, as we said earlier, any reason to sort of build anything, and then they collapse. And then out of that collapse, and just look at what's happened in Russia, you've got, I would argue at the moment, I mean, forget Ukraine, and we did have a finance director whose son married a Russian, and he said when he went over to Russia, there are no laws really. You get on with your life. As long as you don't try and challenge Vladimir Putin, you can build up a very successful business. Okay, if you get too big, then probably there's a sort of a mafia element to the whole thing. But actually, on a day-to-day basis, there is no health and safety executive or no government regulation. So they've thrown off that sort of mantle of communist sort of oppression. And I think there is probably more individualism now within Russia than there arguably is within a lot of the Western sort of centrally planned economies.
I'm not sure it's the model I want, though.
No, I'm not saying it's the model you want, but what happens is you asked me about socialism. Yeah. Socialism destroys any form of individual sort of enterprise. And then that individual enterprise, which is always there, it will come. And as you know, the story about communism is you drive through these grey streets with all the houses look the same. But then you go in through the front door and it's like a palace inside. Yeah. But instead of being honest about what you are, this is where I said you live a lie. Yeah. You live a lie because you don't want everybody else to see how you're living. And I don't want to live in a society like that. I want to live in a society where people are able to express themselves, where success, as you said, is respected, because we're all different. We all have different skill sets. And in the end, we all live by interfacing with each other and finding our own level. That's how it works.
Rupert, we're about to hit our time, and I think we could have done about 3 hours on this. We'll have to do it again sometime. I wanted to finish on football, really. Do you miss it?
Well, look, I love sport.
Do you miss it being the chairman?
I still play tennis. Look, football was very bad for my health. I mean,
don't tell me that.
Probably the best day of my life was when we got to the Cup final in 2003. We played at Cardiff. We lost to Arsenal 1-0, Robert Pires. Little Brett Ormerod missed an open goal at the end. We probably could have won that game. But look, that was probably the best day of my life. My family came. The Saints supporters rarely treated me with great aplomb. Funny enough, a lot of them now are coming forward saying, they actually approve of what we're doing, which is fantastic. In the end, I got damaged by the media because, as you probably know, big football is controlled by the media. If you win the battle off the pitch, the players go onto the pitch and don't believe they can win. But actually, they can win if they believe they can win. So, look, I did love it, but my blood pressure went up. You know, you sit there in that front row, and they're chanting Rupert Lowe's a wanker. You tell your wife it's not true, and you can't show it, but it does affect you. And, you know, the other one they used to sing was Swing Lowe, Swing Rupert Lowe from the Itchen Bridge whenever we went 1-0 down. I go, well, I didn't pick the team. I didn't have anything to do. I'm not on the pitch. But as you know, fans can never blame the players. They always have to blame authority.
Yeah. Rupert, look, this has been great. I appreciate your time. You've been very generous. I hope we get to do it again sometime. I guess it's going to be a busy 4 years.
Thank you for the education in Bitcoin.
Well, listen, look, we will get together. If you, Nigel and Richard and the others want to talk about it, you can set up a round table. I can bring the experts in from all around the world. You know, we're going to fall behind the US because I don't think the Labour Party will do anything about it. But they're certainly going to rush ahead. But look, good luck. It's impressive what Reform have done. I wish you the best, and we're going to keep an eye on what you're doing.
And good luck with your football club.
We'll get you down there one day.
Get the blood pressure tablets in now.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening.